Oh, she finna pull off in her car. She finna pull off in her car. No! They just put that girl car! Man, what do you want she in your car for? What the f wrong with this? Oh, this trying to speed off in the car. This trying to speed off in the car. Wrong. Oh, Jesus.
This one car, a bullet hole here in the trunk, another at the top of the trunk, one through the window, and then one on this other side next to the gas tank. The shooting happened after two women, one reportedly the victim, Asia Poole, got into a fist fight. And then right after that fist fight was broken up, that's when we heard the shots fired. Witnesses described what happened here last night as something like World War III.
10:31 p.m. That's the exact minute paramedics pronounced her dead. Not in a hospital, not in an ambulance. On the concrete breezeway of the apartment complex, she called home. By the time the shooting stopped, investigators would count, not estimate, 168 rounds fired into a residential parking lot. Not a war zone, not a movie set. A place where kids ride bikes and neighbors sit on their porches in the summer heat. And here's the part that still stops people cold. Almost the entire thing was streamed live on Facebook. Somewhere out there, a 5-year-old girl went to bed that night with a mother. She woke up the next morning without one. This is the story of Asia Alice Poole. Stay with me, because this case has everything. A public feud, a stolen getaway car, a jailhouse murder for hire plot, and a police camera system that was supposed to be watching and wasn't. If true crime cases that expose how the system fails real people matter to you, hit subscribe now, because we're about to go deep into every layer of this one. August 20th, 2024, a Tuesday night, nothing special about the date on the calendar. Monarch Ridge Apartments, sometimes still called by its old name Valley Brook, sits in the 2900 block of Gallant Drive in Birmingham, Alabama. It's the kind of complex most residents will tell you they moved into because the rent was manageable, not because it was glamorous. But by 2024, Monarch Ridge already had a reputation. This wasn't the first shooting there. It wouldn't be the last. But nothing before it, and nothing after it, would shake the city like what happened that August night. Police say a physical altercation broke out in the parking lot. Not a shooting yet. A fight. Fists, not bullets. According to investigators, the woman on one side of that fight was Asia Poole, 21 years old. On the other side was 19-year-old Jania Hendricks. Witnesses later told reporters the two had an ongoing dispute. Some accounts point to tension over a man both women were allegedly involved with. It's the kind of conflict that plays out in relationships across this country every single day. Most of the time, it ends in raised voices, maybe a scuffle, maybe some ugly comments on social media the next morning. This time, it didn't end there. According to police, once the fight was broken up, Asia and the people around her moved toward the breezeway of her building. And that's when everything escalated beyond anything anyone standing in that parking lot could have expected. Shots. Not one. Not a warning shot into the air. According to Birmingham police, investigators would ultimately document at least 168 rounds fired at the complex. Multiple shooters. Some witnesses described people in masks. Some described weapons modified with so-called Glock switches. Illegal devices that convert a semi-automatic handgun into something that fires almost like a fully automatic weapon, spraying rounds in seconds instead of one careful trigger pull at a time. Think about that for a second. 168 rounds in a residential complex. At 10 o'clock at night, when families are inside, kids are getting ready for bed, and neighbors are walking to their cars. When police arrived, they found Asia Poole on the ground in the breezeway of her own apartment building. Unresponsive, bleeding from a gunshot wound. Birmingham Fire and Rescue worked on her right there at the scene, but it was already too late. She was pronounced dead at 10:31 p.m. She wasn't the only person hit that night. Another individual, described by police as Asia's best friend, was also struck by gunfire. He survived. But surviving a hail of 168 bullets is its own kind of trauma that doesn't show up on a police report. If this story is hitting you the way it hit us researching it, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. This community has helped bring attention to cases just like this one before, and it matters. Here's what makes this case different from almost every other homicide investigation you've heard about. Investigators didn't have to rely only on 911 calls. shaky witness memories, or grainy security footage that may or may not have been working. They had Facebook Live. According to Birmingham police, video from a live-streamed broadcast captured both the initial fight between Asia and Jania Hendricks and, according to officers, the chaos that followed as it escalated
Oh,
into
she finna pull up in her
gunfire.
car. She
A
finna pull
police
up in her car.
spokesperson would later tell reporters that the Facebook Live footage played what he called a major role in identifying suspects and building the case. Think about the sheer strangeness of that. Somebody, in the middle of a fight that was about to turn into a shooting, had a phone up streaming to friends and followers in real time. Whether it was recorded to document a beef, to settle a score online, or simply because someone hit go live out of habit, that decision to record ended up being one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. But here's the twist that made Birmingham's police chief visibly frustrated at a press conference not long after. Monarch Ridge Apartments had its own security cameras lining the property. Cameras that, in theory, should have been feeding directly into the Birmingham Police Department's real-time crime center, a technology hub designed to give officers eyes on trouble as it's happening, sometimes even before a 911 call comes in. According to Police Chief Scott Thurman, those cameras were actually connected the way they were supposed to be. In a residential complex with a documented history of violence, the very system meant to help stop it, or at least solve it faster, wasn't working as promised. So think about what that means. The professional surveillance system built specifically to prevent tragedies like this one failed. And it was a stranger's smartphone, live streaming to Facebook, that ended up doing more for the investigation than the complex's own cameras. That's the kind of detail that should make every viewer stop and ask, how many other apartment complexes across this country have security systems that exist more for the sign on the fence than for actual protection? While shots were still echoing through the complex, police say Jania Hendricks, the woman who had been fighting with Asia only minutes earlier, got into Asia's own car, a Ford sedan. According to witnesses, the car was already running, and Jania allegedly jumped in and sped off into the night. Think about the layers of that moment. A woman flees the scene of a shooting that just killed the person she'd been fighting with, driving that same victim's car. It didn't take long for police to track it down. The stolen sedan was found abandoned in the parking lot of a chicken restaurant on Center Point Parkway, according to reports, only about a 3-minute drive from the crime scene. No occupants. Just an empty car sitting in a fast food parking lot, evidence of a chaotic, panicked escape. That detail alone became one of the most talked about parts of this case online. A young woman goes live on Facebook fighting the victim, and within minutes of gunfire erupting, she's allegedly speeding away in that same victim's vehicle. To many who followed the case, it read like something scripted for television. Except it wasn't fiction. It was a 5-year-old's mother, and the car she used to drive her daughter to daycare. If you're new here, this is exactly the kind of case we dig into. Deep breakdowns of real investigations, the evidence, the twists, and the human cost behind the headlines. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. In the days following the shooting, Birmingham Police Department detectives worked around the clock. By August 26th and 27th, the arrests started coming. The woman allegedly seen fighting with Asia in the Facebook Live footage was taken into custody and charged with first-degree auto theft for allegedly fleeing the scene in Asia's stolen car. She was booked into the Jefferson County Jail on a $30,000 bond. Jania's brother was arrested and charged with intentional murder and attempted murder. According to Jefferson County Circuit Court records, he was held without bond. His attorney indicated a hearing would be held to determine whether bond should be set at all, given the severity of the charges against him. Was also charged with intentional murder and attempted murder, and, like Justin Hendricks, was held without bond at the Jefferson County Jail. Then came a fourth arrest just days later, charged in connection with the murder as well, given a total bond of $120,000. 4 people, 4 different levels of alleged involvement, from an alleged getaway driver in a stolen vehicle to 2 men police say opened fire with intent to kill, and police made clear from the very beginning, this wasn't over. A Birmingham police officer told reporters at the time that detectives believed there may have been more than just 2 shooters involved, and that the investigation was ongoing to determine if additional suspects needed to be identified. They were right. Not long after, A was named and booked into the Jefferson County Jail as part of the same investigation, bringing the total number of people charged in connection with Asia Poole's death to 5. Remember, every person named in this case is entitled to due process, and these are charges, not convictions. The justice system still has to prove its case in court. But the sheer number of people police allege were involved paints a picture investigators described as chillingly coordinated. One resident, speaking to reporters anonymously out of fear of retaliation, put it bluntly. It looked less like a spontaneous fight gone wrong, and more like an ambush. People positioned, exits blocked, like whoever did this had been planning it. It's easy, in a story with this many twists, the live stream, the stolen car, the 168 rounds, to lose sight of the person at the center of it. Asia Alice Poole was 21 years old. She was a mother. Her daughter was kindergarten age, old enough to know her mum's voice, her laugh, the way she said good morning. Not old enough to understand why her mother isn't coming home. Court records and news reports don't give us a Hollywood biography of Asia Poole. They give us the outline that every homicide leaves behind. An age, an address, a daughter, a fight that spiraled into something no one, not even, we can hope, the people who allegedly pulled the triggers, could take back once it started. That's often the cruelest part of stories like this one. The headlines focus on the chaos, the bullet count, the live stream, the stolen car, because those are the details that generate clicks and views. But behind every one of those details is a 5-year-old girl who is growing up without her mother because of a conflict that had nothing to do with her. If there's one thing we try to do on this channel, it's make sure the victim isn't reduced to a statistic in the process of telling the story. Asia Poole was somebody's daughter, somebody's mother, and now she's a name in a case file that a courtroom in Jefferson County, Alabama, will be working through for years. Monarch Ridge Apartments didn't become a headline for the first time on August 20th, 2024. Go back a few years, and you'll find other shootings tied to the same property on Gallant Drive. In one earlier case, a man was shot and killed while sitting in his own vehicle, having what witnesses described as a conversation with someone in a nearby SUV, before a passenger got out and opened fire. That case, too, ended in a murder charge. So when Asia Poole was killed, it wasn't an isolated tragedy for the complex. It was the incident that finally forced the city's hand. In the aftermath, the city of Birmingham filed what's called a public nuisance lawsuit against Monarch Ridge, arguing that the property's owners and managers had allowed conditions that repeatedly put residents in danger. That lawsuit eventually ended in a settlement, one that required the complex to implement a whole list of new security measures, surveillance cameras that actually work as intended, license plate readers at the entrances, regular security patrols, and a gated entry point staffed with on-site security. The settlement also placed the property under a period of court oversight, essentially forcing outside accountability onto a complex that critics said had ignored the warning signs for years. But, and this is where the story gets uncomfortable, those upgrades didn't solve the underlying problem. Residents interviewed by local news after the improvements were installed had mixed feelings. Some said the new security made the complex feel less like home and more like a facility under lockdown. One long-time resident described feeling almost imprisoned behind the new gates. Others argued that the violence at Monarch Ridge wasn't coming from the people who actually lived there, but from outsiders who used the complex as a place to settle disputes, then disappeared back into the city. And tragically, the story didn't end with the lawsuit or the settlement. Monarch Ridge saw at least one more homicide investigation after Asia's case, a shooting that was initially investigated as a murder before later being ruled accidental, involving a fight between family members at a party. That incident reopened the exact same questions Birmingham had already been asking. Were the court-ordered security upgrades actually being enforced? Was anyone checking? This is where a case like Asia Poole's stops being just a true crime story and becomes something bigger. A window into how so many American cities handle chronically violent properties. Lawsuits get filed, settlements get signed, cameras get installed. And then, all too often, enforcement quietly fades until the next tragedy forces the conversation to start all over again. If stories like this, the ones that connect a single crime to a much bigger systemic failure, are the kind of content you want more of, make sure you're subscribed, because we cover cases like this every week, and we always try to go past the headline into the why. You'd think 168 rounds fired into a residential complex, a live-streamed killing, and 5 people charged would already be the ceiling for how disturbing this case could get. It wasn't. More than a year after Asia's death, in September 2025, a Jefferson County grand jury handed down a new indictment against Justin Hendricks, one of the 2 men originally charged with murder in her killing. According to court documents, Hendricks was now facing additional charges: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and shooting into occupied vehicles, all connected to a separate, unrelated case. Local reporting described the new allegations in stark terms. While Justin Hendricks sat in jail awaiting trial for Asia Poole's murder, investigators allege he was involved in plotting a murder-for-hire scheme from behind bars. Let that sink in. A man already facing intentional murder and attempted murder charges for a killing that was live-streamed to Facebook, allegedly continuing to orchestrate violence while locked up awaiting trial. Details of exactly who the intended target was in that alleged plot have not been publicly released. But the mere existence of a second separate set of violent charges, stacked on top of the original murder case, tells you everything about how this story refused to stay contained to one single night in August 2024. It's the kind of development that turns a tragic, isolated shooting into something that looks a lot more like a pattern. As of the most recent reporting, the criminal cases tied to Asia Poole's death are still working their way through the Jefferson County court system. Justin Hendricks and Taylor McLeod remain charged with murder and attempted murder. Jania Hendricks remains charged with auto theft. Akareya Denai Woods remains charged in connection with the murder, and a 5th individual remains part of the same investigation. None of these cases have been publicly reported as resolved by trial or plea at the time of this video, so every name mentioned here should be understood the way the law requires: charged, not convicted. The presumption of innocence belongs to every one of them until, and unless, a Jefferson County jury or judge says otherwise. What we do know, with certainty, is this. On August 20th, 2024, a 21-year-old mother named Asia Poole went outside her own apartment building and never came back inside. 168 rounds were fired in a place where children live. A getaway happened in the victim's own car. A camera system built to prevent exactly this kind of tragedy wasn't even properly connected. And a 5-year-old girl is growing up without the one person who was supposed to walk her through kindergarten, middle school, prom night, everything. That's the story underneath the headline. Not just 168 rounds and Facebook Live, though those details are what pull people into a story like this. The real story is a community that had been begging for accountability at Monarch Ridge for years, a justice system now trying to sort out exactly who's responsible for a killing captured almost in real time, and a child who will one day be old enough to read every article, every police release, every court document about the night she lost her mother. If this case affected you the way it affected our research team, we need you to do 3 things right now. First, subscribe. We cover cases like Asia Poole's every single week, the ones that expose real gaps in how our systems protect people, the ones the national news cycle moves past too quickly. Second, drop a comment. Tell us what stood out to you most. Was it the fact that the apartment's own cameras weren't even connected properly? The stolen getaway car? The jailhouse murder-for-hire allegations that surfaced more than a year later? We read every comment, and honestly, some of the best leads for future cases we cover come straight from this community. And third, if you know someone who lives in a complex with a history like Monarch Ridge's, share this video with them. Awareness doesn't undo what happened to Asia Poole, but it's exactly how properties like this one finally get held accountable. Through public pressure that doesn't let up until something actually changes. Rest in peace, Asia. And to her daughter, this story and every story like it exists so that what happened to your mother is never, ever forgotten. We'll see you in the next one.